Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to the series about anger, or books my dad picked on a theme, anger, which should probably have a better title, but it isn't going to get one because we're coming up on the end of this sub-series anyways. So, the book that we're covering this week is Mordecai Richler's O Canada, O Quebec, Requiem for a Divided Country. I will explain what the arrête stop sign thing is about to those who don't know in a minute, but I'm going to begin by saying something that is doubtless wholeheartedly controversial to somebody out there in the world. And that is, I heard a rumor once, distantly far away, I think it was in a newspaper at some point, because everything referencing Canada and the outside world gets into Canadian newspapers because we are always so delighted when somebody pays attention to us. We're like a really, really big New Zealand like that. Like, we're just super happy that somebody acknowledges us, which is sometimes weird. Anyways, but the thing is, I heard in passing that the Scottish were considering using Quebec and Canada as some sort of a model for gaining independence from the United Kingdom. And I'm going to say the thing that came to mind when I saw that, which is 2 points. First, Quebec hasn't succeeded at leaving Canada yet, and second, please keep in mind that if you decide to follow the path of Quebec in doing so, as long as you're in the country, everyone else in the United Kingdom will think that you are the worst human beings on the face of the planet and will want to spit on you. Here's the thing about what happened. If you read this book, it will go through it. And the thing is, this is a book that covers events that predominantly happened at the end of the 80s and through the early 90s, so they loom very, very large in my memory. Reading this book was, at many points, just a waltz down memory lane as I looked at all of those names and said, oh yeah, I remember when Bourassa was premier of Quebec. Whew, boy. And Jacques Parizeau and all the rest of them. The thing is that this book is going chapter and verse through what happened. And what happened was that Quebec, there is a long and difficult history between English and French in North America and Canada in particular. The first issue, of course, being the contretemps, the Plains of Abraham, the point where the British basically finally crushed the French in North America, took over the region of what was shortly thereafter termed Lower Canada. For the record, for anybody who wants to feel super insulted about something being called Upper Canada and something else being called Lower Canada, while there is a certain amount of English sense of smug superiority, it was designated such because so-called Upper Canada is further above sea level than so-called Lower Canada on the St. Lawrence Riverway. Nobody is saying that the Upper Canadians are better. They're saying they're further up from sea level. I have a side issue of this because some people recently kicked up a huge stink about the Law Society of Upper Canada and how they felt that it was somehow marginalizing somebody, I don't know who, because the Law Society of Upper Canada was named that back when Ontario was still known as the Law Society of Upper Canada, but they had a massive vote about it and changed it to the Law Society of Ontario, which isn't a problem per se. It's just a bunch of people were kicking up a stink because it was being called by the previous region name instead of the current one, as though somehow that was actively marginalizing people. Anyways, I don't know. Maybe I don't know enough about who felt they were being marginalized by that to get it. But anyways, you think Canada has no controversy? We have controversy. Our controversy is usually about stuff like language, like the bulk of this book. See, when French Canada got taken over by the English, It's written into our Constitution all sorts of things, ostensibly to create equality between the two, including naming French and English to be both official languages of Canada and so on. But the fact was that the French were marginalized, and it took a very long time for them to get some sort of genuine political parity, and Quebec is the big outlier as being the Francophone province. New Brunswick is a close second as the bilingual province. Yes, New Brunswick, the province that everybody forgets. So the thing was that in Quebec, at one point during the 1970s, they had the so-called Quiet Revolution, which was when they sort of tried to take back their own and, move from being second-class citizens in their own province. And they succeeded at that, and there became, economic powerhouses and all kinds of stuff. And then, during the 70s, they decided they were going to start putting in place language laws. Laws that were basically saying, we are a French-speaking province, so French should be predominant at all times. If you are going to have English on a sign, it has to be smaller and in less distinct lettering than the French. The French has to be bigger, or it has to be in big red letters, while your English is in little tiny black letters, or whatever it is, but the French has to pop, and the English has to be as close to invisible as possible. And this became a huge, huge thing. You'll notice that in Quebec, they had, at that time at least, stop signs in which it was written in both languages, arrête and stop. And Bill 101 inspired several people to go to several of these signs and spray paint them so that it would say 101 instead of stop. Because that's how you show your support for the bill, I guess. Anyway, so there was a lot of back and forthing, and the thing was that as Quebec became more and more draconian in its language laws, they began to drive out Anglophones. They began to drive out Anglophone businesses as in the autumn, Ottawa contributed to our linguistic squabbles, creating a candy crisis. A food inspector with the Department of Consumer and Corporate Affairs ruled that jelly babies and fruit pastilles, manufactured by Rowntree plc of Britain, had to be removed from the shelves of a British souvenir shop in Toronto because the names and ingredients were not printed in both official languages. Now that's, of course, in Toronto, which is in English Canada, not French Canada. But the point is that things became extremely draconian in Quebec as more and more people would be fined or taken to court by, state officials, provincial officials, over doing things like saying, well, my bookstore sells only English books, so my bookstore just has English signs, because if you can't read English, why would you be in there? But they got extremely upset about this. They got upset about recent immigrants who wanted their children educated in English because more of the country speaks English than French, and so if people want more opportunities, also opportunities in the United States, you need to be able to speak English, and so on and so forth. Also, of course, Quebecers, Francophone immigrants don't always want to come to Quebec, even though Quebec is the Francophone province, I suspect in no small part because they speak French the way people in Appalachia speak English. That is, Quebecois French is occasionally known as Joual, is French that hasn't changed as much since the 17th century as it has in the rest of the world. Likewise with Appalachia, where English hasn't changed nearly as much since the 17th century, which is why the way they talk is different from the rest of us. It's not that their English is wrong, it's that their English is unchanged from when people first settled the region. which just shows you how linguistic drift goes. Anyways, so the thing that pushed Mordecai Richler, a famous Jewish author, into particular vitriol was the fact that for some reason anti-Semitism got its moment in the sun, and a great many people blamed Anglophone Jews for the marginalization of Quebec. And he was extremely irate about this, and so this is a book in which its author is irate over being an Anglophone in a predominantly French province, Francophone province, where he is not allowed to have signs in his native language. He is writing about people who are angry because they believe the French way of life is disappearing. He is writing about people who are angry because they are being driven out of a province that is their home. He's writing about businesses that are angry because they have to pull up stakes and leave to somewhere that they can do business in English without being harassed by the government. And finally, of course, the what felt endless, certainly in the late 80s, early 90s, rounds of separation referenda. Because this was the final stage. Quebec tried, or the Quebec government at the time, the separatist governments, tried to vote themselves out of the country, in effect. They have a referendum, and everybody in Quebec goes and they vote, and they say, do we want to stay in Canada, or do we want to leave? Or do we want to have sovereignty association, where we continue to use the Canadian dollar, and we continue to get transfers, but we get to do our own thing anyways. It's frequently compared to being like teenagers who want to move out but want to continue also having mom do all of their laundry. We'll leave and we won't take our portion of the Quebec's portion of the national debt with us. Goodness no, why would we have to take our portion of the debt? And so on and so forth. And the thing was that the rest of the country watched this, and most of us got heartily sick of it. Even those of us who were about 8 to 10 years old, 12 years old, we all got sick of hearing about it, and we all got sick of hearing about Quebec, and we all wanted them to just stop, and if they were going to leave, could they please pack up and leave? Except, of course, there were the various First Nations tribes who were living in the Quebec regions who said, we don't want to leave with Quebec. We're staying in Canada, and you can't boot us off of our land, so if you leave, you're going to have to cut out all of these areas that we still lay claim to. And Anglophones were saying, no, we're staying, and various other portions of Canada are saying, that whole northern portion of Quebec that was ceded to you at Confederation, that's only because you were part of the country. If you're not part of the country, you don't get to keep that either. And so on and so forth. And it was intensely aggravating and exhausting and transfixing, and I promise to any Scottish person listening that if you use this as a model, everyone in all of the British Isles, even the Republic of Ireland, will be really, really sick of you, because trust me, even the Republic of Ireland will get tired of watching this and will not offer you any support whatsoever as a nation, because they too will be sick of it. It will be that bad. So please, for the love of all that's unholy, don't use Quebec as a model. It's a bad idea. So there's my 2 cents on the most controversial thing hopefully the most controversial thing that will ever come up on this channel. And I'm sure that if anybody from Quebec is listening, they will have opinions. I'm just speaking as to the experience of somebody who watched this happen as a child and got totally sick of it. This book, by the way, very entertaining read. Also, a lot about anti-Semitism in it. Because there was a lot of that, too. Anyways, that is everything that I'm going to say about this book. So I'll see you all next week.